All right, welcome back to the Travi Wavi. I'm your affable host, Travis Eason, local Renaissance man and podcaster. And here we are once again with another live podcast brought to you from the Neon Parrot Live Studios, downtown Abilene, Texas. We're located next door to Majestic Coffee Shop, serving, apparently it's Onyx. That's what we're told, and I think it's pretty fabulous.
Allegedly,
sorry, Onyx. Allegedly, they're serving Onyx, and it's quite tasty. We always welcome you to come down and join us in our live audience. We go live Thursday mornings between 10 and 10:30, and we'd love to have you come down and say hi, take a peek, meet our guests. Well, this week we have another fabulous guest. Producer Sam and I had a chance to go out Monday to the land that we're going to talk about. But I bring to you today Kent Smith. Welcome, Kent.
Thank you, Travis. Great to be here.
We're really excited to have you on.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about all things that you're interested in, and we're going to get into a lot of fun subjects. But before we do that, I'm going to ask you the question I ask all my guests. Do you have any siblings?
I do. I have one sister living in southern Wisconsin.
In southern Wisconsin. Do you guys stay in touch?
We do.
Good. When was the last time you got to be together?
We talk by phone, time or two a week, typically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So staying in touch.
Yeah.
That's good. So Monday morning, Sam and I picked you up from your home, and we drove out to the Eden Eden Center.
Yeah.
And this was brought to my attention by a mutual friend of ours, Bonnie Buchanan, and her sister's also involved in this on some capacity. So why don't you, real quick, before we get into your history, give us just a little sense about Eden Center, what it is, and then we can kind of talk about the why.
Sure. Well, right now the Eden Center is 93 acres or so up on the Callahan Divide, so southeast of Abilene, about 25 miles. And we have owned this land for about 10 years now. Actually, we just made our last 10-year land payment this month, so we're happy to own it free and clear. And we have been developing it slowly as a center for training and for the experience of a better way of life. Mm-hmm. That'd be a simple way to say it.
That's a great way to say it. So you're a former ACU professor. You started your career at ACU in 1991.
Right.
And you were also very involved in the Oxford program that ACU partners with, and even managed that for ACU in 2002
Correct.
or so,
yeah.
for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I know those experiences, at least from the students that I've known that have gone there, it's very enriching. There's a lot of cross-population of ideas and networking of people. So in your mind, go ahead and give us a little lecture about what you see the problem as, and then we can kind of address why you've gotten to this point as the solution.
Yeah. Well, the Oxford experience was really helpful for me and Karen, my wife, in 2002. We actually went over just for 4 months originally, but the managers there had resigned in late spring, and so we got this desperate call from Abilene. Hey, would you be willing to stay for another 4 months? So we weighed that very carefully. Let's see. August in Abilene, August in Oxford. And we were able to conclude that it would be good to stay on, and then ended up being there the full year. But that time was a great deep dive for us into thinking more carefully about what does it mean to equip men and women for service and leadership throughout the world, which is kind of ACU's kind of core motto for who we are and what we're up to. And one of the things that was very clear to us is that in what was then post-Christendom Europe, so I think they said the average weekend or average week in those days, 1 to 1.5% of the population would be in church. So there was that side of it, lots of relics of Christendom, big cathedrals, big church buildings all over, but almost no one showing up for those, a lot of them becoming nightclubs and other venues, even for other religions. But the Christian population there that remained was very creative and very engaged and very deeply attentive to kind of new things God is doing. And so it was fascinating to kind of come alongside some of those people, learn. And while we were there, the dean from our college here visited. And I said, Jack, we really need to raise the bar on the experiential side of our training. We claim to prepare men and women for Christian service and leadership throughout the world. But in any field that I know of, to be a leader is to be someone who actually has done things, not just someone who has great information about something. So the fact that we're asking people to read, 17,000 words or pages a week or whatever is not the same thing as preparing leaders. And he agreed, and I think a lot of us had long since come to that conclusion. But what were we going to do practically about that? And so when we got back in 2003, we began a program called the Missionary Residency for North America, which was a kind of immersive program for graduate students. Typically, we worked with cohorts of 4 to 12 over the next 12 years. And that was an amazing experience for us, really encouraging, enlightening. I think students came away transformed in significant ways. But a dozen years into that, Karen and I kind of looked at each other and said, this is amazing, this is wonderful, and it still is not meeting all of what's needed.
What were some of the things that you felt were lacking at that time?
So one of the big things was we observed more and more students were coming to us pretty deeply broken. A lot of them raised in single-parent homes or often just kind of more or less raising themselves with parents largely absent. A lot of them with big trust issues, issues of neglect, issues of abuse in one form or another. And we were trying to kind of help these people find deeper understandings of life together and life together on mission with God. But the community piece of that was really hard for Americans to kind of get a handle on, and especially the young ones we were working with. So that issue of just brokenness and the inability to form trusting relationships very quickly was one of our big challenges. A second one was the lack of imagination for intergenerational community. So all of our students, almost to the person, had spent their entire life, most of their waking hours with peers from preschool on up through graduate school. And that created a sort of a gap in their imagination for what life would be like when they moved away from Abilene. So to Chicago or to Miami or to Singapore, wherever God wanted to invite them, call them. And that presents a real problem, as we saw over time, that young couple lands in a place, wants to live in a way that's good news for the neighborhood and for the city they are. But if their whole imagination is, I'm going to find some people my own age and hang out with them, well, as most people who have tried to do that know, life gets pretty consuming pretty fast. Just trying to make ends meet as a young family. And then the children come along. And if you have only peers, you're dealing with people who are in the same boat. And the stresses of life can become so overwhelming that there is no margin, literally no margin for building community of any kind if your imagination is for peers. So what we have lost, and we might talk about this a little bit more later, is this imagination for the intergenerational community that I think is where human families and human individuals have been formed in the healthiest ways for all of human history, right? Across cultures and times and places. People have best been formed and been able to carry healthy culture in a place where they were seen and heard and known and understood. And our students coming to ACU mostly did not have that in their background. They didn't have that imagination for that aunts and uncles, grandparents, moms and dads, cousins, younger kids around as a part of the matrix of where they were growing up. The third thing that we saw, and again, this is particularly challenging in a North American context, our radical individualism, our sense that the thing that trumps everything else is how can I have the best life for myself, often simply cuts against and eliminates the possibility for true community, because community is built over time and intergenerationally. And if I don't have a sense of being called to a people and to a place, if I don't have a sense of kind of really being by God invited into a thing that God is up to, if I don't have this sense that I am a part of a bigger story than my own, then it's really easy to say, hey, I like the seashore, so been nice knowing you guys, but I got a job offer in California, or I love the mountains and Colorado's calling, so see you later. And I think most of us who have tried to build community in the U.S. know that frustration of people that you are just getting to know. You're just beginning to really feel like, oh, they get me, they love me, even in spite of my brokenness and all my flaws. And then they announce, hey, it's been nice knowing you, but we're out of here. And that's just so devastating. Eventually, in my observation, people begin to give up at some point after enough of those disappointments on the possibility of really living a deeply interdependent life. So the sense of calling or covenant or agreement that we're here together for a reason was also absent. And so all of that kind of combined, it's a long way to get answer to your question, but really combined to cause Karen and I to say, you know what we really need to do is we need to embody this thing we're telling people, these young people, they should be doing. And so we invited a few friends, some former students, eventually several other couples that we really respected, and we formed the Eden community as a intergenerational, interdependent community of God's love. Fatally flawed, all kinds of problems, challenges, but really trying to live out this interdependent way of life as a demonstration plot and an invitation to students to come alongside and watch, come see. To whatever degree you're interested. So that's kind of the genesis, some of the genesis for the Eden community.
Well, and you know, I think about current culture, and there's a lot of discussion about, hey, you know, let's just all get together and start a commune. Doesn't that sound like the easy thing to do? Let's just get all our friends together, family together. We'll just buy some land. We'll start a commune. And in many ways, this is exactly what you guys have done, and or continuing to work on and do. But you're doing it with a real intentionality for. Like I would say even more of a focus on the community itself and how to communicate with one another. And I know we can talk a little bit about sociocracy versus like a democracy or a Robert's Rules of Order way of going about making decisions and leadership, because I think that's fascinating. But, you know, you guys have been doing this for a while. You've had a number of years of making progress in small ways. And it's, I think it's, so this is one of the reasons I wanted to highlight you on the show, is because this is something that people are talking about, thinking about doing, maybe don't have a good model for how to do it, but here you guys are at the Eden Center saying, well, we may be faulty in this, and we may fail a bunch, but we're going to continue to try to do this because we believe that this is a solution to our current cultural endemic of what is our culture.
Sure. Yeah, nearly always when we begin to talk about this with people, especially from America, one of their first questions, whether they say it out loud or not, is, isn't this some kind of cult, you know? So, I mean, because that worry, I think, is deep in the American cultural mindset. You know, we have seen sometimes firsthand, but certainly have heard about groups that kind of went off the rails and got crazy. Some radical leader led people to kind of lose their minds and lose their awareness of what's true and real. And so there's a natural pushback and even fear, I think, in a lot of people around a deeper, more interdependent kind of a community. But I think what has blinded us, and it's kind of a frog in the kettle kind of a thing. It's happened very gradually in American culture, but there's a natural and enormously healthy form of human life that has been the primary incubator for loved people through all cultures and all generations. And different cultures and different groups have called it different things, but essentially it's extended family. It's interdependent, intergenerational communities of love. And until about 100 years ago, all human culture was largely interdependent, intergenerational communities, right? Whether villages or the ancient Mediterranean oikos households, whether kind of tribal groups in more transient kind of societies. But for all of human history, most people have been born into a walkable world where they were known and seen and heard and understood and celebrated by most of the people that they knew. You know, Now, we all know enough world history to know that wasn't always a peachy keen thing.
Sure.
But there was sort of a baseline of village or colonia or tribal life where people were born into a place where they're mostly spending their days eating and working and playing and among a group of people that knew them, you know. And about 100 years ago, a big experiment really began, largely with the advent of some of the modern technologies. So Henry Ford said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could give everybody a horseless carriage and they could travel more quickly and get from one place to another. A few decades after the car began to become ubiquitous, architects and forward-thinking people like Frank Lloyd Wright said, you know, the ability to move around quickly and so far that the automobile makes possible means we could imagine another way of life where we're not all huddled up in cities, or the city dwellers aren't huddled up, but they can move out into, well, let's call it the suburbs. And so a new kind of way of life gets imagined and then begins to be built out in North America, largely prior to anywhere else in the world. And so 100 years ago, 1920s and 30s, Americans began moving out of towns and villages and out of the cities into suburbs. So roughly in 1900, 90% of the U.S. population lived in rural or agrarian areas, 10% in the cities and urban areas. By 2000, 100 years later, that number had just almost completely reversed. 90% in urban and suburban areas, 10% in agrarian and rural populations. And the shift there, it's huge. It's way more profound than I think a lot of us have stopped to think about. But to get from one to the other, we had to begin to think about family in fundamentally different ways. So people move off the farm to get work in the city, and now they've moved away from aunts and uncles. And think the Walton family, you know, that old family that has a shared sawmill. They eat 3 square meals a day together. They walk over from the shop to share the noon meal together. They're working with a grandmother and a grandfather and some cousins and a few other folks that are associated with the family business. It's a tight, close community. They fight, they struggle, but they have to work it out because they're what they've got, you know. And that context begins to go away in the early 1920s, 1930s, largely after World War I. And so by the middle of the last century, about the time I was born, 1950s, the suburb has kind of become the new norm, and the new family system is now mom, dad, and the kids. It's the nuclear family, not the extended family, but the nuclear family. And the nuclear family is by nature much more brittle than the extended family. It has fewer resources, less capacity to absorb shocks, and the increasing demand on just the financial challenge of living the suburban lifestyle put increasing pressure on families to put both adults in the workforce. So moms begin to leave home and begin to work in the workforce as well, which means kids are basically left home. There's latchkey kids, but there's kids left home big gaps of the time in the week to kind of raise themselves. Well, a lot of those brittle families, without the wisdom and the surplus and the support of extended family, begin to break up. So in the latter 1900s, and I think I watched this happen, and I think most people my age could talk about specific experiences of seeing these nuclear families break up. And so now it's a single parent trying to raise children often, and the single parent almost of necessity is in the workforce or trying to make ends meet somehow or another. And so less time and attention for the kids. The kids are more and more raising themselves, mostly with peers.
Or on their screens now,
or on
too.
And more recently, yes, absolutely, with the advent of the internet and the World Wide Web, and of course in the early 2000s, the arrival of the ubiquitous computer, the iPhone, suddenly kids are basically raising themselves, you know, and essentially left to their own devices. But that leads to the kind of brokenness I was describing earlier. people who can't trust, who don't even have the social skills really to listen well to another person or to see the reality that other person is experiencing, because everything has been so so broken in their own background.
And, and isolated too.
Isolated, yeah.
Without the tools or the experience of what is that like to be introduced to people. I mean, I remember, just real quickly as an analog to this, but my dad managed country clubs when I was real little, and it was very common on any given weekend when we'd be there for brunch or whatever to go around and introduce, me as a 4, 5, 6-year-old, and you look just like your dad or whatever. But those kind of memories, actually, I think, if now that I'm pulling them out, that experience helps me today as a grown man to be much more comfortable in a social engagement or whatever. So yeah, I mean, if you're not even experiencing how to meet your neighbors or how to get along with grandma and grandpa or an uncle or cousins, then you are more isolated and more limited in your skill set.
That extended family is such an incubator for, what the psychologists call today one of the most profoundly essential human needs, which is to be seen and heard and understood and celebrated and empowered, and to have a sense that we can go on together as a unit, as a family, as a friend, as a team. The fancy psychological term for that is attunement, but the people who are doing the deep study of neuroscience and neural chemistry say, as much as you hunger and must have air, must have food, must have the basic physical needs of humans, the need for attunement is a fundamental, non-negotiable, must-have human experience. And if we don't have it, we're just fundamentally broken. And it starts as early as infancy. That first moment that your mother holds you and looks into your eyes, you're beginning to learn the skills of attunement and attachment that are foundational for really all human interaction going forward. If we don't get it, mom's absent, family's absent, then we hunger for it and we search for it in often very unhealthy, helpful ways. The good news is, if you find that kind of community that will attune to you in those kinds of ways, those things that are unformed or malformed in terms of your basic life experience can be healed and you can become whole. But it still takes a village. Yeah. It still takes a village for all of us in all stages of life, from infancy on through grandparents.
Well, and that's interesting because we were talking before the show about how it, even though I as an individual might have some pride about wanting to do things myself and get it done in a particular way because it's my way or the highway, really the only way that I'm going to grow as a human is to have the humility to engage someone else or others. It's almost impossible to go through life in that bubble of isolation. We really need each other. We really need each other.
So true. Yeah. And Travis, I would say that the thing you just described, this kind of profound interdependence that is the nature of humans, is really the nature of all of life. That's, my background before my theology training was in biology and in ecological biology. And one of the things that you learn if you just study the realities of the universe is everything is connected. Everything is interdependent. All life forms are ultimately comprised of particular organisms that are themselves a collection of interdependent systems. Your skeletal system, your circulatory system, your neural system, all of those are profoundly necessary for a human body to work, right? And the same thing is true interdependently across individuals. We need each other. It's the way the universe is wired, and we can't hardwire around that. As much as English and especially American kind of philosophical and social background has caused us to kind of lean toward independence, and not without some value. There's some good things about that. But one of the ways that it has blinded us, I think, is the simple reality that we cannot survive. We certainly cannot carry on culture by ourselves. Culture has to have a community to have the memory, to have the practice, to have the shared understanding of what is to carry on. So it's an area of deep brokenness, especially in America, that most folks aren't aware of and that we must address.
So I think we've clarified what the problem is, that we've been living in a culture that has slowly been steering us away from interdependence towards independence, and the wake that that's created has left a lot of us feeling broken and isolated and lacking in social skills, and maybe even just a complete unawareness that healing can happen in community.
Yeah.
It's almost like we don't have that perception. So now that we've kind of clarified the problem some historically and currently, talk to me about Eden Center and why land, physical land, and healing the land is important to this process.
Yeah. Well, the same realities that we were describing in terms of social necessity for interdependence ultimately press us to think through, how do we recreate walkability as our normal matrix of lifestyle in an age when we're hyper mobile, when we have the capacity to get from here to there, all the time, easily, effortlessly, with almost no thought. But the walkability piece is something that is invisible to us, but it's so profoundly important. Those casual interactions that you have with a family because you're in the same house, you're on the same schedule, you're eating meals together. All of those things that happen in a close village kind of a context where you have a commons and people are getting their mail in the same place, they're having coffee together. All of those things are the matrix, the cultural context, the setting in which the kind of life we're talking about can actually happen well. So place can't be separated from the meaning of your life. The issue of our location inevitably and necessarily is one of the factors that we have to pay attention to if we're wanting to have a thicker, deeper life together with others. How do we do that? Well, through history, again, there have been infinite variety of ways that people have managed to kind of do life together in the same place. I was fascinated years ago with an article title that said, "Why are there no Hittites in New York City?" It's a fascinating title. Why are there no Hittites in New York City? If you get into it a little bit, you realize, well, in the ancient Iron Age, the Israelites were this little bitty group in the Middle East, and then the Hittites were a much larger kingdom, much more influential. But here, many thousands of years later, you find no Hittites anywhere in New York City or any other major city in the world, but in almost all of those cities, you find Jewish people. And so how is that? Why is that? Well, there's lots of ways to kind of think about that. But one of the ways I think that's helpful is to realize that the Jewish people have had a way of carrying a portable but very local culture with them wherever they went. I was talking about this several years ago in North Carolina, and one of the people in the group that we were talking with said, "Yeah, recently I had several people come up to me and say, we would like to buy a neighborhood." And I said, "Pardon me?" And they said, "Yes, we need a neighborhood close to the synagogue here. We're a Jewish community, and we have to be within walking distance of the synagogue because that's how we travel on the Sabbath." And so she said they wanted to buy the neighborhood, so that they could be there together and walk about. Well, that's part of the reason that there are no Hittites in New York City, but there are lots of Jewish people, because the Jewish people have found a way to stay local. And it's not just, obviously, that particular part of their culture, but it's a whole set of things that cause them to have constant, steady interaction with one another, week by week, day by day. A kid who's in a walkable neighborhood is going to be recognized by the neighbors, and grow up in a context where he knows the biological as well as the spiritual relationships that are around him. All of that to say that place, land, being proximate to one another, it's not enough by itself. We know lots of people who live in apartment complexes and in hospitals and old folks' homes that are not close to each other, prisons. Proximity doesn't solve things all by itself. But without it, it becomes more and more difficult to really build the kind of community that we all need. And so, again, we're not even imagining that what we're doing in the country is the one true way to do this. In fact, we have some experiments we're working on here in Abilene town, some downtown, some in the suburban areas. But what we do know is that place is important, and for people to have a sense of place and a sense of this is my home, these are my people, is inevitably meaningfully tied to place in a way that nothing else really can replace. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Yeah.
It does make sense. So it's almost like we have to put our stake in the ground first and surround the stake.
Yeah.
And say,
Yeah.
who else wants to be here with me?
Yeah.
So, let's keep on the land subject a little bit, because Sam and I got to come out on Monday and take some pictures and meet the McVeys and kind of see where y'all are at, the progress that's been made so far. And I know that something that's been important to your group is to restore the land. And this is a historic piece of land that was purchased.
Yeah.
Share some of that with us. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a God story, as these things often are. And so it's a one-off. But we decided to form as a community in 2013, 2013. And began looking for land. We had talked to some friends about maybe their land, which seemed like an ideal thing to us, but they weren't ready and weren't interested in selling at that point. So we had come to the place of being interested in a piece of land down toward Buffalo Gap to the southwest of Abilene. About 30 acres, had a good offer for that. And so we were in our community discernment circle just kind of talking about making that offer. And one of the younger guys said, I can go forward with this decision, but only if we check with that first family that we talked to about their land and see if anything has changed for them. I think we all felt like that would be a much better solution. So that's part of our discernment process. We kind of listened to each other, and so we said, okay, well, we'll hold off and check in with those people. So what we didn't know is that landowner had, on his 70th birthday, been looking out over his land in a particular corner of it and saying, Lord, we felt like you asked us to set aside a part of this land for a special purpose when we first bought it. Is that going to happen in my lifetime? And he said there was no audible voice from heaven, but he had a deep sense that yes, it was going to happen, and it was going to happen soon. So 2 weeks later, I gave him a call, say, hey friend, we're about to make an offer on another piece, but we thought we'd check in with you one more time before we made that offer. And so wondered if anything had changed. So there was this kind of pregnant pause on the phone, and then he said, yeah, as a matter of fact, let's get some coffee. So we sat down, and the result is that we were able to buy this 93 acres.
That's great.
The way to that has felt like kind of a God thing from the outset.
And when we visited the property, Brenda McVeigh was very, very excited to talk to us about some of the history that this particular piece of property very well may have been the very first piece of land owned by a free man, a former slave,
yes,
a black man, and we got to see the well that he had dug, a hand dug well, and some of the foundations around kind of where his home place had been. What are some other fun bits of history that we can talk about with the land?
Yeah, that was an amazing thing to discover is that the land that we had bought was actually a farm owned by one of the very first, if not the first, landowner in Callahan County, a gentleman named John Clements. And John had come with the Wyndham family to that part of the country, has served as a assistant to Dr. Wyndham in his medical practice, and ultimately the family gave John this piece of land that is essentially what is now the Eden Center. So that was an amazing discovery, and we've just continued to learn fascinating things about John in the time since then. He was got a great education. He went to great lengths to get well educated. Became a good horseman. Raised horses and cattle. Grew cotton and peanuts on the land. Was one of the first orchardists in the region. Raised peaches and plums and pears.
And you guys recently may have found one of the original orchards, or at least a peach tree that had come up from probably where the orchard was.
Yeah.
Which is super exciting. And you've mentioned that you've grafted some of those peaches to other trees in town.
Yeah.
So that's exciting to continue that history.
We're excited to eventually maybe have a Clements peach available for building out on the land and elsewhere.
And John's neighbors, the Wyndhams, they remained friends and family for many years. And when we were out there, there's a 300-plus-year-old live oak tree right on the property line between the two parcels of land, and you guys shared with that. It's just a beautiful old tree. And just to think back to the history of that time, not even that long ago, 100 years ago, to think back to the families and the community that they established on that land even back then.
Yeah.
Which is pretty great.
Yeah.
It's pretty great. So you guys have done some other work to the land, dam checks, some the governmental agency that came out to help you guys with the swales?
Well, a number of us are permaculture certified, and we have a deep interest in not only preserving the land, sustaining the land, but really in helping to regenerate the land to a whole new level of health. Inevitably, if you monoculture crop land, it becomes mineral deficient over time, and so the land had been degraded, and then it had been left fallow for roughly 70 years before we bought it, for the most part. And so we began to use some permaculture principles. We have some swales, which is basically a ditch on contour that in places like Texas is great for preserving rainfall and letting it soak deeply into the ground and begin to refill the aquifers and the soil closer to the surface. So we've got about maybe 3,000 or 4,000 feet of swales. We put in 15 check dams with help from some ACU students over the years, and then, as you say, we have the high tunnel that we built with the help of the NRCS government agency as a way to begin to grow some crops under cover. And so we've been experimenting on a number of levels to begin to think about how to let this good piece of God's earth become a demonstration plot for how regeneration and regeneration across all of the systems that inhabit it, right? So not just the human system, but also the biological and ecological systems can thrive and flourish and be good news.
It's like healing the land, healing community intentionally, coming together to intentionally form community to start to heal culture.
Yes.
And healing the land to sustain the health and growth of the community. Yeah.
Yeah, so to your earlier point that a lot of folks have talked about, hey, why don't we just go form a commune and get some friends together and move on to the land? I think that's an understandable impulse. I think all of us are in some way drawn to that. I think what we lack, again, because of our inculturation in the American way of life, is an awareness that to do that really well is an ecosystem level, it's a culture level set of decisions. We have to get clear about what our shared story is. Why are we here? In the big picture and individually, why are we here? What are we doing here? So what's our story? We have to get clear about our setting. What's the social setting here? What's the history of this place? who are the people that intersect with this place, what's the ecological or natural system that's here, what climate are we in, what are the winters like, what are the summers like, what's the rainfall like. You can't build culture without awareness of those fundamental realities that shape life. And what's our built environment like? How are we either contributing to or breaking up and fracturing community through the ways that we build our buildings and set ourselves up for life together? So the story and the setting are two fundamental things that people have to consider when they're thinking about a thicker life together. And what holds those together is the systems that they agree upon. So how are we communicating? How are we making decisions in ways that are constructive and not destructive? What is our shared sense of the reason we're here? What's our covenant, our agreement about who we are and what we're doing here? And then what are the rhythms of our life that help us to reinforce those stories in light of this context? So connecting the systems that will enable us to faithfully live out our story in the place that God has given us to do it is it's really a culture building project. And that's the challenge I think that we face. It's not as easy as buying some land and buying some houses and saying, hey, life's going to be great. It isn't unless we're paying attention at the sort of the broad level that all of those things interact.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, it's almost like you have to braid the various pieces together to create the cord. Otherwise, it's just a frayed tassel.
Yeah.
So something else that you showed us when we came out to the land was a really fascinating process, and you are calling it the fabric lime. I can't remember what you called it, but it's a wonderful process of combining locally sourced materials with a little bit of lime and Portland cement to pour. Essentially, it's not concrete, but a concrete type material, and this is something that you're exploring to use to build future infrastructure out there.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that, because I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, everything is connected, right? So, America, is in the middle of a major housing crisis right now, and that's on multiple levels. Affordability is beyond the reach of most people. I think in Texas, they say we're falling behind by about 200,000 units a year in terms of the housing needed for people in Texas. And that's just an example of what's happening across the country. That affordability is a huge issue. But another huge issue is how are we creating things that are actually going to be healthy for people, because a lot of our housing is not healthy. It's prone to mold and bacterial growth when things get wet, and it's also and about a fourth of our population is especially susceptible to those kinds of toxins that form in inadequately built houses. And of course, a lot of our housing stock at this point is getting old, so it becomes more and more leaky and therefore more and more unhealthy. So we need to be thinking about what are some building systems that don't lead us to that outcome. But along with affordability and along with the health concerns, I think is just the question of how are we creating housing that doesn't continue to create harm for the planet, because roughly 40% of all the energy consumed, they say, happens in our buildings, in the building systems that we're using. That has to do with how much energy it takes to heat and cool them, but it also has to do with how much energy is required to put together the building materials that we're using. So, thinking about all those elements, we and wanting to be an experimental demonstration plot, we've been looking at different materials, and what we have at this point is something we're calling fabric-formed limestone. And
Fabric-formed limestone.
Yeah, so it's a first cousin. It's close to a lot of the oldest buildings in the world. If you think about the ancient Egyptians, the Romans, the Great Wall of China, all of them used some combination of local building materials that are earth and lime-based. And so we're just using a little bit more contemporary form of that and thinking about some ways to use lightweight forming to build those walls and ceilings. So we're very much in the experimental stage, not ready to offer solutions at this point, but excited about the possibilities.
Well, it is interesting, and we got to see some of the pillars that you have placed and already poured for an upcoming stage scenario, and it's a wonderful little old oak grove. I'm really encouraged by that, and personally, I'm looking forward to exploring some of that myself, just because I think it's fascinating, it's wonderful, and you mentioned it continues to absorb carbon out of the atmosphere for the rest of its life cycle, which could be literally hundreds to thousands of years if it's kind of left alone. So I'm really encouraged by that, and that one of the things that I really like about Eden Center and what you guys are doing and creating is this intentional community, this intentional restoration of land, and also an intentionality with moving forward to find the best practices to continue to offer healing even in 100 years when you're not here.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yes, it is a lot. Yeah. Sometimes it's overwhelmingly a lot.
I'm sure.
Everything in our backgrounds and everything in our culture and the way the system's set up tends to cut against this. So it's challenging. And I think that's something that, we want to be really upfront with. This is not easy. This is hard. This is difficult, but it's good. I think it's a reaching for what is more true and more real, and what really all of us long for, which is that authentic life where we're really attuned to what's going on in the big world, and finding ways to be good news, to live good news, to live as healthy, engaged, gifted people in the good life that God's invited us to.
This is wonderful. So if our audience wants to get in contact with Eden Center, I think Sam put some of that information up there. They can email or call or whatever contact you have available there. And you mentioned that moving forward, that you're hoping to bring other groups and people out to kind of help educate and encourage and teach a little bit along some of these lines. That's still a goal, I'm sure.
Yeah, we have for over 3 years have offered in the springtime a workshop. We call it the Foundations for Regenerative Culture Workshop, which is kind of a deep dive for folks that want to come and explore how does this work. How do I understand my own story and the story of our community and the big story that we all are living in? How do I think about setting the social, the built environment, the natural environment? How do I think about systems? And how do I think about how those things might weave together in my context to see something thicker and more regenerative happening there? And just this last year, we've decided, at the advice of some of the folks who have gone through it, to make it available online. And so we're hoping to, this next year, make that workshop available online for the first time for about 8 weeks, over an 8-week period, and then with a kind of a capstone experience, landing in a particular place and community to kind of distill and think through how do these principles work themselves out in a particular place. So we're excited about this kind of new iteration of that training, and people who come to our website can get the latest on that, hopefully before too many more weeks.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So if you are in the audience and you are thinking about starting a commune with your friends, a great resource before you even get going is to contact and get in touch with the Eden Center. And because you guys have done a lot of the hard work already, at least a decade worth of trying to form community, to do it in best practice way, and continuing to, I'm sure, struggle with that. I mean, that's got to be an ongoing struggle, probably. Just knowing human nature, and then developing land and infrastructure and being thoughtful and using design thinking to continue to build a culture that's healing and has the potential for massive future impact. I really do think that. Yeah, that's really great. Well, as we wrap up a little bit today, Kent, do you have any other kind of wonderful little bits of I know you're full of wonderful bits of information, but is there anything else you really want to share with our audience today?
Well, I think it would just be a word of hope that this way of life is really, I think, what God intended for all people to have access to. I think, we sometimes tell our grad students all of history can be helpfully summed up in 3 short phrases. In the beginning was joy. In the end will be deeper joy. And in between is an astounding invitation. Come and share in our joy. Because, to make a long story short, even before God said, let's make people in our own image, even before God planted a garden called the place of joy or delight, Eden, even before the Holy Spirit hovered over the chaos, even before the eternal Word said, let there be, there was a community, a communion of joy, of interdependent, intergenerational love and care. And if we fast forward through the Christian and Hebrew story that's depicted in Scripture, all the way to the end of the book, last chapter, last verses, there we find that same community. There's Father, there's Son, there's Spirit, but there's a fourth. And she is a bride, and she's made up from all the families and tribes and peoples of the world. And she and the Spirit invite the reader to come. Come join this eternal banquet, this eternal celebration of the life of God, which is love. And so what we're reaching for here is not new. It's not, an interesting experiment of 21st century America. It's the story that God has been telling and inviting us into all along. And I think it's inevitable that this is where the story goes. I think that what we've been talking about today is God's invitation to all of us to kind of take a deep breath and notice what you long for, and then invest in that thing that God has put in all of us, which is a life together of interdependent, shared love. So
I like that.
Maybe that's enough.
That's good. That's good. Well, yeah, that's probably a great place to end this on. Audience, I hope that you enjoyed this. If you did, please like and subscribe and comment, and feel free to get in touch with Kent Smith through the Eden Center. I'm sure you're happy to answer questions.
Absolutely.
Right? You're really easy to talk to. And I hope you enjoyed today's show. We've got another wonderful guest planned for you next week, another character from the storybook capital of America, right here in beautiful heart of downtown Abilene, Texas. Thank you to our audience members today for being here. And thank you to Sam Wolf, our executive producer extraordinaire, for making another amazing show happen. Weather's beautiful. Come on downtown. There's a lot of wonderful things happening this weekend. Oktoberfest and Arttoberfest is happening in downtown Abilene this weekend, and always just lots of fun stuff to do here in the storybook capital of Texas. Kent Smith, thanks again for being here, and maybe we can get you back on in another 6 months or so and check in and see how the building process is going. And I'd love to come out and see when you guys pour sometime. I'd love to be there for that. Well, friends, thanks again, and we're signing off from the Travi Wavi. Till next week.